The Montana winter had been particularly harsh that year, with snow piling up to the windows of Jack Morrison's ranch house and temperatures dropping to 20 below zero. At 62, Jack had weathered 40 years of these brutal winters, but this one seemed to cut deeper into his bones. The wind howled across the vast expanse of his cattle ranch, creating drifts that blocked the dirt road leading to town for days at a time. It was on one of those isolated February mornings that Jack made his routine check of the barn. His breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air as he trudged through knee-deep snow, his weathered hands gripping the barn door handle. The familiar creak of the heavy wooden door echoed through the structure as he stepped inside, immediately sensing something was different. The horses were unusually restless, their ears pricked forward toward the back corner where he stored hay bales. Jack's instincts, honed by decades of ranch life, told him something was amiss. As he moved deeper into the barn, his boots crunching on the straw-covered floor, he heard it, a soft whimper barely audible above the wind outside. Behind a stack of hay bales, huddled together like frightened animals, were two children. A girl who couldn't have been more than 12, with tangled brown hair and hollow cheeks, held a younger boy close to her chest. The boy, perhaps 8 years old, was shivering uncontrollably, his lips tinged blue from the cold. Their clothes were torn and dirty, clearly inadequate for the brutal Montana weather. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered, his voice a mixture of shock and concern. The children's eyes widened with terror at being discovered, and the girl instinctively pulled her brother closer, as if trying to shield him from another threat. "Please don't hurt us," the girl whispered, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "We didn't take nothing, mister. We was just trying to stay warm." Jack knelt down slowly, his weathered face softening with compassion. Years of living alone on the ranch had made him gruff around the edges, but the sight of these desperate children stirred something deep within him that he hadn't felt since his own daughter had died in a car accident 15 years ago. "Easy there, little ones," he said gently, removing his heavy winter coat. "I'm not going to hurt you. You must be freezing out here." He wrapped his coat around both children, feeling how thin and fragile they were beneath their inadequate clothing. "What are your names?" Jack asked, settling into the straw beside them. The warmth of his coat seemed to encourage the girl to speak. "I'm Emma and this is my brother Tommy," she said, still eyeing Jack warily. "Our mama, she died 3 weeks ago. The state people came to take us away but they wanted to split us up. I couldn't let them take Tommy from me. He's all I got left." Tommy looked up at Jack with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. "Emma takes care of me," he said simply, his voice hoarse from the cold. "She's real good at it too." Jack felt his chest tighten with emotion. These children had been surviving on their own for weeks in one of the harshest winters Montana had seen in years. The fact that they were still alive was a testament to the older girl's determination and resourcefulness. "How long have you been in my barn?" Jack asked. 3 days, Emma replied. "We was walking toward town but the snow got real bad. We saw your barn and we needed somewhere warm. I'm sorry we didn't ask. We was gonna leave as soon as the storm passed." Jack shook his head. "You've got nothing to apologize for. But you can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death." He stood up, his mind already working through the logistics. "Come on, let's get you both inside the house. We'll get some hot food in you and figure out what to do next." Emma hesitated, clearly torn between her desperation for warmth and safety, and her deep-seated distrust of adults who might separate her from her brother. "You won't call the state people, will you? They want to put Tommy in one home and me in another. I promised Mama I'd take care of him." Jack looked into her eyes and saw a fierce protectiveness that reminded him of a mother wolf defending her cubs. "Let's just focus on getting you warm and fed first," he said. "We'll talk about the rest later." As they walked through the snow toward his ranch house, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change dramatically. But what he didn't know was that Sheriff Dale Morrison, his own younger brother, had been looking for these children for weeks, and his intentions were far from protective. The ranch house felt like a palace to Emma and Tommy after weeks of hiding in abandoned buildings and surviving on scraps. Jack had set them up in his guest room, which hadn't been used since his late wife's sister had visited years ago. The children devoured bowls of hot beef stew while sitting by the fireplace, their faces gradually returning to a healthy color as warmth seeped back into their small bodies. Over the next few days, Jack learned more about their story. Emma had been essentially raising Tommy since their mother became ill with cancer the previous year. When their mother died, Child Protective Services had indeed planned to separate them, placing Tommy with a foster family in Billings and Emma in a group home in Missoula, nearly 300 miles apart. "Mama made me promise," Emma told Jack one evening as they watched Tommy play with an old wooden horse Jack had carved years ago for his own daughter. She said families stick together no matter what. Said I was smart enough and strong enough to take care of Tommy until we could find a better way. Jack admired the girl's determination, but he also recognized the impossible burden she'd taken on. At 12, she should have been worried about school and friends, not keeping her little brother alive in the Montana wilderness. On the fourth day, as Jack was teaching Tommy how to feed the chickens, he spotted a familiar patrol car coming up the long driveway. His stomach dropped when he recognized his brother Dale behind the wheel. Dale Morrison had been the county sheriff for 8 years, and while they shared the same last name in childhood, the two brothers had grown apart over the years due to Dale's increasingly harsh approach to law enforcement. Dale stepped out of his cruiser, his tall frame imposing in his sheriff's uniform. At 57 he was 5 years younger than Jack but looked older, his face hardened by years of dealing with the worst of human nature. His cold gray eyes swept the ranch property with the calculating gaze of a predator. "Jack," Dale said curtly, touching the brim of his hat. "Heard you might have some visitors." "Coffee's hot if you want some," Jack replied carefully, instinctively moving closer to Tommy, who had gone very still at the sight of the uniform. "This isn't a social call," Dale said, his voice carrying an edge that Jack didn't like. "I'm looking for 2 runaway kids. Emma and Tommy Richardson. Got a call from a trucker who saw kids matching their description near your property." Jack felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his expression neutral. "What's your interest in a couple of runaway kids, Dale? Seems like more of a social services matter." Dale's jaw tightened. "These aren't just any runaways, Jack. Their mother was involved with some very dangerous people before she died. Drug dealers specifically. She owed them a lot of money, and now they think the kids might know where she hid something valuable." "What kind of something?" Jack asked, though he was beginning to understand the true scope of the danger these children were in. "Let's just say certain people want these kids found, and they're willing to pay well for information about their whereabouts," Dale said, his meaning clear even if his words remained vague. "Now, have you seen them or not?" Jack looked at his brother, really looked at him, and saw a man he barely recognized. The Dale he'd grown up with had been decent if not always kind. This man standing before him had something dark and hungry in his eyes. "Even if I had," Jack said slowly, "I'm not sure I'd tell you. Sounds like these kids are in danger from more than just the cold." Dale stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Jack, I'm going to give you some brotherly advice. There are people looking for these kids who make me look like a Sunday school teacher. If you're hiding them, you're putting yourself in danger too. These people don't care about collateral damage." "And what about you, Dale?" Jack asked quietly. "Do you care about collateral damage? We're talking about children here." "I care about keeping the peace in my county," Dale replied coldly. "And sometimes that means making hard choices. These kids are a liability, Jack. Their mother stole something that didn't belong to her, and now certain people want to clean up loose ends." The implication hung heavy between them. Jack realized with growing horror that his own brother wasn't interested in protecting Emma and Tommy. He was being paid to deliver them to people who would likely kill them to keep them quiet about whatever they might have witnessed. "I think you should leave now," Jack said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Dale studied his brother's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll be back, Jack. With a warrant if necessary. And when I find those kids, and I will find them, I hope for your sake you haven't made the wrong choice." As Dale's patrol car disappeared down the driveway, Jack felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting 2 orphan children anymore. He was standing between them and people who wanted them dead. And his own brother was willing to hand them over. Emma appeared at his side, having watched the entire exchange from the kitchen window. "That was about us, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "We need to talk." That evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep, Jack and Emma sat by the fireplace while Jack explained what he'd learned from Dale's visit. Emma listened with the composure of someone far older than her 12 years, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never breaking down or becoming hysterical. "I knew Mama was scared of something before she died," Emma said when Jack finished. "She kept talking about how we needed to disappear after she was gone, how the state people weren't the only ones we needed to worry about." "Did your mother ever mention hiding anything? Money, documents, anything like that?" Jack asked gently. Emma was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. Finally, she reached into her worn backpack and pulled out a small, battered notebook. "Mama gave me this the night before she died. Told me to keep it safe and never let anyone else see it." Jack accepted the notebook carefully, recognizing the weight of trust Emma was placing in him. The pages were filled with dates, names and numbers in a careful, feminine handwriting. As he read, Jack realized he was looking at detailed records of drug transactions, including names of buyers, amounts and locations. "Your mother was keeping records," Jack said softly. "This is evidence of a major drug operation." "Mama wasn't a bad person," Emma said quickly, defensively. "She only got involved because we needed money for her treatments. The insurance wouldn't cover everything and she was desperate." "I believe you," Jack assured her. "But this notebook, it's dangerous. The people named in here would do anything to keep this information from reaching the authorities. Mama said if anything happened to her, I should take it to the FBI, not the local police," Emma continued. "She said some of the local police couldn't be trusted." Jack felt sick as he realized his brother was likely one of the corrupt officials mentioned in the notebook. Dale's involvement with the drug dealers wasn't just about money, it was about self-preservation. "Emma, I need you to understand something," Jack said seriously. "My brother isn't going to give up looking for you. And the people he's working with, they're dangerous. We need to figure out how to get this notebook to the right people without getting ourselves killed in the process." Over the next hour they developed a plan. Jack's old friend Marcus Webb lived in Helena and worked for the state attorney general's office. If anyone could be trusted to handle the situation properly, it would be Marcus. But getting to Helena meant a 4-hour drive through mountain roads that Dale would certainly be watching. "There's another problem," Jack admitted. "Even if we get the notebook to Marcus, you and Tommy will need to be placed in witness protection. That might mean you'll still be separated." Emma's face crumpled for the first time since Jack had known her. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "He's all I have left. I promised Mama." "Hey," Jack said gently, kneeling beside her chair. "We'll figure it out. I promise you that. But right now we need to focus on keeping you both alive." The sound of vehicles approaching the house interrupted their conversation. Jack quickly moved to the window and felt his blood run cold. 3 pickup trucks were coming up the driveway, their headlights cutting through the darkness. These weren't official vehicles. They were the kind of trucks used by men who preferred to handle their business away from public scrutiny. "Emma, get Tommy and go to the root cellar," Jack said urgently, moving to his gun cabinet. "There's a hidden door behind the shelving unit in the basement. Get in there and don't come out until I come for you personally." "What about you?" Emma asked, fear evident in her voice. "I'll handle this," Jack said, loading his shotgun with practiced efficiency. "Now go." As Emma ran upstairs to wake Tommy, Jack positioned himself by the front window. 6 men emerged from the trucks, all armed, all moving with the coordination of people who had done this kind of work before. In the lead was a man Jack recognized from town, Carl Brennan, a known associate of various criminal enterprises in the region. Brennan approached the front porch while his men spread out to surround the house. "Jack Morrison," he called out. "We know you got something that belongs to us. Make this easy on yourself and hand over the kids." "Don't know what you're talking about," Jack called back through the closed door. "Your brother said you might be stubborn about this," Brennan replied. "But we ain't leaving without them kids. They seen too much and they got something that could put a lot of good people in prison." Jack realized that Dale had essentially signed his death warrant along with the children's. His own brother had sold them out completely. "Tell you what," Brennan continued. "You hand over the kids and that notebook their mama kept and we'll make it quick for all of ya. Fight us and this gets messy for everyone." Jack chambered a round in his shotgun and settled in for what might be his last stand. Outside, he could hear the men positioning themselves around the house, preparing for a siege. In the basement, 2 terrified children huddled in darkness, depending on him to keep them safe. For the first time in years, Jack Morrison felt truly alive. He had something worth fighting for again. The ranch house that had been Jack Morrison's sanctuary for 40 years had become a fortress under siege. From his position by the living room window, Jack could see Brennan's men taking cover behind his own outbuildings, using his property against him. The irony wasn't lost on him, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. "Last chance, Morrison," Brennan shouted from behind Jack's own truck, which they positioned as cover near the front porch. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Jack's response was to shoot out the headlights of the nearest pickup truck. The sound of the shotgun blast echoed across the snowy landscape, and immediately the men outside began returning fire. Bullets shattered windows and splintered wood as Jack dove for cover behind his heavy oak dining table. The siege lasted through the night. Jack had advantages. He knew every inch of his property, had plenty of ammunition, and the house itself was built solidly with thick log walls that provided good protection. But he was outnumbered 6-1, and these weren't amateurs. They maintained disciplined fire, keeping him pinned down while they maneuvered for better positions. Around 3 in the morning, during a lull in the shooting, Jack heard his phone ringing. When he answered, Dale's voice came through the speaker. "Jack, this has gone too far," Dale said, though he sounded more annoyed than concerned. "Brennan's getting impatient. Just give him what he wants and this ends." "What I want to know," Jack replied, keeping his voice low, "is how my own brother became the kind of man who sells children to killers." There was a long pause before Dale answered. "Sometimes you have to choose the lesser of two evils, Jack. These people, they're not going away. If I don't help them, they'll find someone who will, and then we're all dead anyway. So you chose to be the evil," Jack said. "Mama would be ashamed of what you've become." "Mama's been dead for 10 years, Dale snapped. "And her opinions don't pay my bills or keep me breathing." Jack hung up on his brother and focused on his immediate problem. He needed to get word to Marcus Webb and Helena, but his landline was the only phone that worked reliably on the ranch, and he couldn't risk a long conversation while under fire. As dawn broke over the Montana landscape, Jack realized that Brennan's men had been using the cover of darkness to move closer to the house. They now had positions that would allow them to storm the building if they chose to. The situation was becoming desperate. It was then that Jack heard the sound that changed everything, the distant rumble of diesel engines coming up his access road. But these weren't more of Brennan's reinforcements. Jack recognized the distinct sound of his neighbor's snow plow, followed by at least 3 other vehicles. Tom Henley had been Jack's neighbor for 20 years, living on the adjacent ranch with his wife and 2 grown sons. Tom was the kind of man who minded his own business, but when he'd heard gunfire coming from the Morrison ranch all night, he'd known something was seriously wrong. What Brennan and his men hadn't counted on was the tight-knit nature of the ranching community in this part of Montana. When trouble came to one ranch, it affected them all. Tom had called the other neighbors, and they decided to investigate as a group. The convoy that came up Jack's driveway included Tom Henley, his sons Mike and David, Bill Patterson from the ranch to the south, and Jim Crawford, who ran cattle on the land to the east. All were armed, all were experienced hunters and marksmen, and all were outraged to find armed strangers conducting what amounted to a military operation on their neighbor's property. "What the hell is going on here?" Tom shouted from behind his plow blade, which was providing excellent cover from any return fire. Brennan realized immediately that his tactical advantage had evaporated. His men were now caught between Jack's position in the house and 5 armed ranchers with vehicles and better cover. The situation had shifted from a siege to a potential massacre, with his people on the wrong end. "This is police business." Brennan tried to bluff, but he was clearly rattled. "Funny," called out Bill Patterson. "We called the state police 20 minutes ago. They said Sheriff Morrison never reported any operation out here. Said they're sending troopers to investigate." Jack felt a surge of hope. If state troopers were coming, they might actually have a chance to get out of this alive. But he also knew that Brennan would become increasingly desperate as his window of opportunity closed. "Jack." Tom called toward the house. "You all right in there?" "I'm fine," Jack called back. "But I've got 2 kids in here that some people want to hurt. That's what this is about." This information galvanized the neighbors even further. Whatever else might be happening, the idea of men with guns threatening children on their neighbor's property was absolutely unacceptable to these rural Montanans. "You boys need to pack up and leave," Tom said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who dealt with every kind of trouble the wilderness could throw at him. "Right now, before this gets worse for you." Brennan looked around at his tactical situation and realized he was trapped. The arrival of the neighbors had turned his carefully planned operation into a public spectacle that would be impossible to cover up. But he also knew that leaving empty-handed would likely mean his own death at the hands of his employers. It was then that Jack heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Not just 1 or 2, but several vehicles approaching fast. The cavalry was finally arriving, but Jack couldn't be sure if they were friend or foe until he saw who stepped out of those cars. The next few minutes would determine whether Emma and Tommy lived to see another day, and whether Jack would survive his decision to protect them. The convoy of state police vehicles that roared up Jack's driveway was led by Captain Sarah Martinez of the Montana State Police, followed by FBI agents from the Helena field office. Marcus Webb, Jack's old friend from the Attorney General's office, had received Jack's message and had immediately coordinated with federal authorities who had been investigating the drug network for months. Brennan and his men found themselves surrounded and outgunned, with nowhere to run across the open ranch land. The standoff ended quickly once they realized they were facing federal agents rather than local law enforcement they might have been able to intimidate or bribe. "Carl Brennan, you're under arrest," Captain Martinez announced as FBI agents moved in to secure the scene. Along with conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, and about a dozen other charges we'll be adding as we go. As Brennan was handcuffed and led away, he caught sight of a familiar figure emerging from one of the state police vehicles, Sheriff Dale Morrison, also in handcuffs. Dale's corrupt arrangement with the drug dealers had been exposed when Marcus Webb presented Emma's notebook to federal investigators. "Jack Morrison?" Captain Martinez approached the house as FBI agents secured the area. "We understand you have 2 children who may be material witnesses in a federal investigation." Jack opened the door cautiously, then called down to the basement. "Emma, Tommy. It's safe to come up now." The children emerged from their hiding place looking exhausted but unharmed. Emma still clutched her mother's notebook, while Tommy stayed close to his sister's side. The ordeal had been terrifying, but they had survived. Over the next several hours, FBI agents interviewed Emma about her mother's involvement with the drug network and the information contained in the notebook. Emma's detailed account, combined with the written records her mother had kept, provided federal investigators with enough evidence to dismantle a drug operation that had been operating across 3 states. "What happens to us now?" Emma asked Agent Patricia Sullivan, the FBI investigator assigned to their case. "Well, that's going to be up to the family court," Agent Sullivan replied gently. "But I can tell you that the federal prosecutor's office is going to recommend that you and Tommy be placed together, given the circumstances and your role in helping us solve this case." Jack had been listening to the conversation, and he found himself speaking before he'd fully thought through what he was saying. What if they had somewhere to stay? Somewhere permanent? Agent Sullivan looked at him curiously. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Morrison?" "I'm suggesting that these kids need a home, and I've got a big house on a working ranch that's been too quiet for too long," Jack said, looking at Emma and Tommy. "If they'd be willing and if it's legally possible, I'd like to apply to become their guardian." Emma's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. "You'd really want us? Even after all this trouble?" "Emma, you and Tommy aren't trouble," Jack said firmly. "Your family has been since the moment I found you in that barn." The legal process took several months to complete. Jack had to undergo background checks, home studies, and numerous interviews with social workers and court officials. But his neighbors, led by Tom Henley, provided character references that painted a picture of a decent man who had risked his life to protect 2 vulnerable children. Emma and Tommy were placed in Jack's temporary custody while the paperwork was processed, and during that time, something beautiful began to happen. The ranch house that had been silent and lonely for so many years began to fill with the sounds of children again. Tommy's laughter as he learned to ride the gentler horses, Emma's voice as she read to her brother by the fireplace in the evenings. Jack found himself remembering what it felt like to have a purpose beyond just surviving from one day to the next. Teaching Tommy how to care for the animals, helping Emma with her correspondence school lessons, and simply having people to cook for and worry about gave his life a meaning it had lacked since his own family had died. The final custody hearing took place on a bright April morning, 6 months after that terrible February night. Judge Patricia Henderson reviewed all the documentation, interviewed all parties and made her decision. "It's clear to this court that Mr. Morrison has provided these children with not just safety and stability, but with love and commitment that exceeds what many biological families achieve," Judge Henderson stated. "Furthermore, the children have made it clear that they consider Mr. Morrison to be their family, and they wish to remain in his care permanently." She signed the papers that made it official. Emma and Tommy Richardson became Emma and Tommy Morrison, and Jack became the father he had never thought he'd have the chance to be again. Dale Morrison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for his role in the drug conspiracy. Carl Brennan and his associates received much longer sentences. The drug network was completely dismantled, and several other corrupt officials and various law enforcement agencies were exposed and prosecuted. On a warm summer evening a year later, Jack sat on his front porch watching Emma help Tommy with his reading while their homework was spread out on the porch table. The same barn where he'd found them was now filled with the horses Emma had learned to love and the chickens that Tommy considered his personal responsibility. Tom Henley drove up the driveway as he did most evenings, to share a beer and discuss ranch business. The community had rallied around Jack's new family, providing support, friendship, and the kind of network that made raising children in rural Montana not just possible but rewarding. "Any regrets?" Tom asked as they watched the children play with the ranch dogs in the yard. Jack considered the question seriously. His life had certainly become more complicated, more expensive, and infinitely more worrying than it had been when he lived alone. But as he watched Emma patiently teaching Tommy how to throw a baseball, and saw the confidence and joy that had replaced the fear and desperation in both children's faces, he knew his answer. "Not a single one," Jack said. "Best decision I ever made was not turning them away that morning in the barn." As the sun set over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the Morrison family began gathering their things to head inside for dinner. They had survived the worst that life could throw at them, and they had found each other in the process. Sometimes the most important families aren't the ones you're born into, but the ones you choose to create when the moment demands courage, compassion, and love. On that February morning when Jack Morrison found two frightened children in his barn, he had no idea he was about to save not just their lives, but his own as well. The ranch that had been a lonely monument to past losses had become a home filled with hope for the future. And three people who had been broken by tragedy had found healing in the simple act of choosing to love and protect each other, no matter what dangers they faced together.